David Chen stared at the single candle stuck in a protein bar wrapper, watching the small flame dance in the recycled air of his tiny apartment. 39 years old today and nobody cared. The walls of Mars Colony 7 felt smaller than usual, pressing in on him like the loneliness he carried everywhere. His job studying alien bugs and weird plants made other colonists nervous. They called him strange behind his back, whispering about how he spent hours talking to creatures that most people found disgusting. David had learned to eat dinner alone, work alone, and now celebrate his birthday alone. The synthetic beer in his hand tasted flat, but it was all he could afford on a researcher's pay. Outside his small window, the red landscape of Mars stretched endlessly under the dome that protected the colony. David had come here 5 years ago, hoping to make important discoveries about alien life. Instead, he found himself cataloging microbes and plant samples that nobody else wanted to touch. His reports gathered dust in digital files while his colleagues worked on more popular projects. The silence in his apartment felt heavy, until emergency sirens began wailing across the colony. David jumped up, spilling beer on his worn carpet. Red warning lights flashed through his window as the automated voice system announced a colony-wide alert. All citizens were ordered to move to emergency shelters immediately. David pressed his face against the window and saw something impossible. A massive shape was falling from the dark sky, but it wasn't falling like a meteor or crashed ship. The object moved with purpose, adjusting its path as it approached the industrial section of the colony. Whatever it was huge and alive-looking, with surfaces that seemed to pulse and shift. The impact shook the entire colony. Buildings swayed and lights flickered as the mysterious object settled into the mining district. David could see smoke and strange green light coming from the crash site. Colonial defense forces were already mobilizing, their vehicles racing toward the location with weapons ready. Most people would have rushed to the emergency shelters as ordered. David was not most people. His years of studying alien life had taught him to notice things others missed. The way the object had landed suggested intelligence and control, not an accident. Something about the green light reminded him of bioluminescent organisms he had studied. David grabbed his research kit and headed for the door. His hands shook as he put on his environment suit, but excitement mixed with his fear. This could be the discovery he had been waiting for his whole career. Whatever had just landed on Mars was unlike anything in human records. The corridors of the residential block were empty as David made his way toward the surface exits. Emergency protocols had cleared the area, and automated systems guided everyone to safety zones. David used his research clearance codes to override several security doors, knowing he would face serious consequences later. The surface of Mars felt cold even through his heated suit. David moved carefully through the industrial district, staying in shadows to avoid the military patrols that were setting up a perimeter around the crash site. The strange green light grew brighter as he approached, and he began to smell something like flowers mixed with metal. When David finally saw the crashed object up close, he stopped breathing for several seconds. It wasn't a ship in any sense he understood. The structure looked grown rather than built, with organic curves and surfaces that resembled tree bark mixed with scales. Parts of it still moved slowly like a giant creature taking deep breaths. A section of the structure opened with a wet sound and something emerged. David crouched behind a damaged mining robot and watched as the most beautiful and terrifying being he had ever seen stepped onto Martian soil. She stood 8 feet tall with skin that looked like living jewels. Her scales shifted from deep purple to bright silver as she moved, catching the light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Her body was humanoid, but clearly not human, with a long skull that came to elegant points and golden eyes that seemed to glow from within. A ridge of sharp spines ran down her back, and her fingers ended in claws that could probably cut through metal. David realized he was looking at a dragon made real. She moved with grace despite obvious injuries, and strange silver blood dripped from cuts on her arms and legs. The blood glowed where it hit the ground, and David noticed that the Martian soil around the drops began to turn green with new plant growth. Colonial defense forces arrived with weapons drawn and voices shouting orders. The dragon woman raised her hands in a gesture of surrender, but her golden eyes showed no fear. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the distance, and David was shocked to hear perfect English. "Please," she said, looking directly at the soldiers. "I seek sanctuary. I mean no harm to your kind." The soldiers hesitated, clearly unsure how to handle a talking alien that looked like something from ancient Earth legends. David saw his chance and made a decision that would change his life forever. He stood up from his hiding place and walked toward the group, his research credentials ready and his heart pounding. "Wait," David called out to the soldiers. "I'm a xenobiologist with the Colony Research Division. Under first contact protocols, this being should be studied before any other action is taken." The dragon woman's golden eyes found David's face, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude. David felt like she could see straight through to his soul, understanding in an instant that he was different from the others, that he might actually help her instead of hurt her. As military commanders argued over radio channels and reinforcements arrived, David made another decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped closer to the wounded alien woman and offered her his hand. "My name is David," he said simply. "It's my birthday today, and I think meeting you might be the best present I've ever received." The dragon woman looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then carefully placed her clawed fingers in his palm. Her skin felt warm and slightly electric, and David sensed incredible strength held carefully in check. "I am Lyra," she replied, and David thought he heard relief in her musical voice. "Thank you for your kindness, David. I hope your birthday brings you joy." Standing there under the Martian sky, holding hands with an impossible creature while soldiers surrounded them, David realized his lonely days might finally be ending. The argument between David and the Colonial Defense Forces lasted 3 hours. Commander Roberts wanted to take Lyra to a military facility for interrogation, while David insisted that proper first contact protocols required scientific observation in a neutral environment. David had spent years reading colonial law during his lonely evenings, and now that knowledge became his weapon. Section 47 of the Colonial Charter clearly states that any first contact situation must include a qualified xenobiologist, David argued, waving his research credentials. "I'm the only one on Mars Colony 7 with the proper training and clearance." Commander Roberts looked frustrated but couldn't argue with regulations. After several heated radio conversations with Colonial Command, David was given temporary custody of Lyra for scientific assessment. The decision came with strict conditions and round-the-clock surveillance, but it was better than a military prison. David's small apartment felt even smaller with Lyra inside it. She had to duck through the doorway and her spine scraped the ceiling when she stood up straight, but she moved carefully, aware of her size and strength in the confined space. David offered her his only chair while he sat on the floor, suddenly aware of how shabby his home must look to someone who traveled between stars. "Your dwelling is cozy," Lyra said diplomatically, her golden eyes taking in the cramped room. "It reminds me of the healing pods we use on my homeworld. Small spaces can feel very safe." David felt embarrassed by the state of his apartment. Empty food containers sat on the counter. Research papers covered every surface, and his clothes were scattered across the floor. But Lyra didn't seem to judge him. Instead, she looked curious about everything, especially his collection of alien plant samples growing under artificial lights. "You study living things," she observed, reaching toward a purple vine that David had been growing for months. "May I?" David nodded, watching nervously as Lyra's clawed fingers gently touched the plant. The reaction was immediate and amazing. The vine's purple color deepened to a rich violet, and new leaves began sprouting along its length. Within minutes, the sickly plant had transformed into something vibrant and healthy. "How did you do that?" David asked, staring at the transformed plant. "My people have a connection to living systems," Lyra explained. "We can encourage growth and healing in most organic matter. It is part of who we are, like your ability to think and create." Over the next few days, David learned more about Lyra and her people, the Draconis Collective. They were an ancient race that had mastered biotechnology, millions of years before humans discovered fire. Instead of building machines, they grew them. Their ships were living creatures. Their cities were vast organisms, and their technology was based on symbiosis with other life forms. "We have watched your species for some time," Lyra told David as he carefully treated her wounds with supplies from his research kit. "Most of my people believe humans are too chaotic and unpredictable for contact. They call you a dangerous species because you form bonds across genetic lines." David paused in his work, looking up at her beautiful alien features. "Is that why you're here? To study us?" Lyra's golden eyes grew sad. I am here because I disagreed with my people's decision to avoid your kind. I believe that different species can live together and help each other grow. My government called this thinking heretical and dangerous. So you're a refugee, David realized. Yes, my ship was damaged during my escape, and Mars was the nearest safe landing site. I had hoped to find sanctuary among humans, but I understand if your people are afraid of me. David looked at this magnificent being, who had fled her own kind to seek friendship with humans. Her scales caught the light from his grow lamps, creating patterns like living art across her skin. Despite her fearsome appearance, everything about her suggested gentleness and wisdom. I'm not afraid of you, David said quietly. I think you're wonderful. Something changed in Lyra's expression, a softening around her golden eyes. You are different from other humans I have observed. There's no fear in you when you look at me, only curiosity and kindness. As days passed, David and Lyra settled into an unusual routine. David continued his regular research work, but now he had a living alien to study who was happy to answer his questions. Lyra learned about human culture through David's books and entertainment files, finding human stories fascinating. Your species creates myths about beings like me, she said one evening while watching an old dragon movie on David's small screen. But in your stories, we are either evil monsters or wise guides. You never imagine us as simply people trying to find our place in the universe. Maybe that's because we've never met any real dragons before, David replied. Stories are easier than reality. Lyra's presence began changing David's apartment in subtle ways. The plants grew larger and healthier, producing flowers and fruits that filled the air with sweet scents. Even the building's living support system seemed to respond to her, with air filters working more efficiently and water recyclers producing cleaner output. David found himself changing too. For the first time in years, he looked forward to coming home. Conversations with Lyra ranged from serious discussions about xenobiology to silly debates about human food preferences. She had a sense of humor that surprised him, often making gentle jokes about human customs that she found amusing. You have individual sleeping chambers, she observed one evening. My people share communal rest spaces. Does isolation not make humans lonely? It does, David admitted. I've been lonely for a long time, but having you here makes everything feel different. The surveillance equipment monitoring his apartment meant they couldn't speak freely about many topics, but David and Lyra developed their own ways of communicating. Sometimes just a look or gesture was enough to share complex thoughts. When Lyra touched his hand while examining his research notes, David felt a strange tingling sensation. Not painful but electric and warm at the same time. Later he noticed that a small cut on his finger had healed completely in just a few hours. Did you do something to me? He asked. Your species has remarkable compatibility with our bioenhancement abilities, Lyra explained. I may have accidentally shared some healing properties with you. I hope this is acceptable. David looked at his perfectly healed finger and smiled. It's more than acceptable. It's amazing. On the fifth night, as they sat together watching the stars through his small window, Lyra spoke about her fears for the future. My people will come looking for me, she said quietly, and your Galactic Council allies will not want an unauthorized alien in their territory. Our time together may be limited. David felt a cold fear in his stomach. The idea of losing Lyra now, just when he had found someone who understood him, seemed unbearable. Then we'll have to make the most of whatever time we have, he said. Surprising himself with his determination, Lyra smiled, the first truly happy expression he had seen on her beautiful face. You really are different from other humans. David Chen. I am grateful the universe brought us together. As they sat in comfortable silence, David realized that his birthday wish had come true in the most unexpected way possible. He was no longer alone. The message arrived at dawn on the seventh day. David woke to find Lyra standing perfectly still by the window, her scales showing patterns of deep red and black that he had never seen before. Her golden eyes fixed on something far above the Martian sky, and her breathing had become slow and deliberate. They're coming, she whispered, without looking away from the window. Who's coming? David asked, but he already knew the answer from the fear in her voice. My people, 3 hunting ships approaching from the outer system. They will be here within 2 days. David felt his heart sink. The past week with Lyra had been the happiest time of his adult life. Every day brought new discoveries about her people and new understanding between them. Now their time together was ending before it had really begun. The colonial government was already in panic mode. Commander Roberts called David to an emergency meeting, where nervous officials argued about what to do with their alien guest. Some wanted to surrender Lyra to her own people immediately. Others suggested hiding her or even helping her escape to another system. The Galactic Council is also sending representatives, Commander Roberts informed David grimly. Apparently, unauthorized alien contact violates several interspecies treaties. They want Lyra handed over to them for processing. Processing? David asked. Interrogation, study, and eventual return to her home system. The Council maintains order by keeping species separated. They see our contact with Lyra as a dangerous precedent. David returned to his apartment feeling helpless and angry. Lyra was sitting quietly on his floor, her scales now showing swirls of silver and blue that somehow conveyed sadness. She looked up when he entered, and he could see the resignation in her beautiful features. "You spoke with your leaders," she said. "It wasn't a question. They want to hand you over to either your people or the Galactic Council," David said, sitting down beside her. "I'm sorry. I tried to argue, but they're afraid of starting some kind of interstellar incident." Lyra nodded slowly. "I expected this. Your species is young and still learning about galactic politics. You cannot risk your place in the wider community for one refugee." "That's not fair," David said angrily. "You're not just some refugee. You're a person who deserves to choose her own fate." Lyra looked surprised by his vehemence. "You would risk your people's safety for me." "I would risk a lot of things for you," David realized as he said it. "These past days with you have been the best of my life. I can't just let them take you away." Before Lyra could respond, the lights in David's apartment suddenly went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. Through the window they could see explosions in the distance as something attacked the colony's outer defenses. "That was not my people," Lyra said, her scales shifting to aggressive patterns of orange and yellow. "Draconis hunting ships do not attack civilian targets." David's communicator crackled with emergency broadcasts. Unknown vessels were firing on colonial installations while demanding the immediate surrender of the illegal alien fugitive. The attacks were precise, targeting defensive systems without killing civilians. "The Galactic Council?" David asked. "No. They prefer legal pressure to violence." Lyra's golden eyes narrowed as she considered the situation. "Someone else knows I am here. Someone who wants to capture me for their own purposes." Over the next few hours, Mars Colony 7 became a war zone. The mysterious attackers used advanced technology that easily overwhelmed colonial defenses. David and Lyra huddled in his apartment, listening to radio reports of the battle raging outside. "I have to surrender myself," Lyra said eventually. "Too many humans are dying because of me." "No," David said firmly. "There has to be another way." That's when Lyra told him about the secret she carried. Hidden in her genetic memory was the location of something called the Seed Vault, an ancient repository of biological knowledge from across the galaxy. Her people wanted to destroy it to prevent contamination between species, while others wanted to control it for their own power. "The information in my mind could reshape the galaxy," Lyra explained. "That is why I fled my homeworld and why these others hunt me now. The Seed Vault contains the genetic templates of countless extinct species, along with the technology to bring them back and merge their best traits." David stared at her, understanding for the first time why Lyra was so important. She wasn't just a refugee or a first contact situation. She was the key to something that could change the nature of life itself. Another explosion shook the building closer this time. David made a decision that surprised even himself. "We're leaving," he announced, pulling on his environment suit. "Where can we go?" Lyra asked. "The entire colony is under siege. I know someone who might help us. A professor named Elizabeth Warren runs a research station on Titan. She's been studying alien artifacts for years, and she doesn't trust the Galactic Council any more than I do." David gathered his most important research files, while Lyra used her abilities to encourage the apartment's living systems. Under her influence, the building's bioconcrete walls grew thicker and stronger, creating a protective cocoon around them. The air filters became more efficient, and the emergency power systems began producing more energy than their specifications should have allowed. "How are you doing that?" David asked, watching his apartment transform around them. Your species builds with living materials but doesn't know how to awaken their potential, Lyra explained. I am simply encouraging the building to become what it was meant to be. They made their way through corridors that had become tunnels of living stone, guided by walls that glowed with soft bioluminescence. Lyra's presence was transforming the entire residential block into something more like a living organism than a building. In the transport bay, David found exactly what he needed, a small mining vessel designed for long-range asteroid surveys. The ship was old but reliable, with enough fuel and supplies to reach the outer system. Can you interface with human technology? David asked as they climbed aboard. I can try, Lyra replied, placing her hands on the ship's control console. Immediately, the vessel began responding in ways David had never seen before. Systems that had been offline for years suddenly came to life, and the engine efficiency readings climbed far beyond normal parameters. As they lifted off from Mars Colony 7, David looked back at the colony under siege and felt a mixture of sadness and excitement. He was leaving behind the only home he had known for years, but he was also embarking on an adventure that could change everything. Where exactly are we going? Lyra asked as they cleared Martian orbit. To find people who believe that different species can work together, David replied, and to keep you safe while we figure out how to use what you know to help everyone. Lyra's scales shifted to patterns of gold and white that David had learned meant hope and gratitude. You continue to surprise me, David Chen. Your species may be chaotic, but you are also remarkably brave. As their small ship headed toward the outer system, pursuing vessels began following them. The hunt for Lyra had become a chase across the solar system, with the future of galactic civilization hanging in the balance. The journey to Titan took 5 days through space that had become increasingly dangerous. David watched their sensor displays with growing anxiety as more ships appeared throughout the solar system. Some belonged to the Galactic Council, others to the mysterious forces hunting Lyra, and a few showed energy signatures that matched nothing in human databases. Your solar system has become very popular, Lyra observed dryly as another unknown vessel appeared on their long-range sensors. David had never piloted a ship beyond Mars orbit before, but Lyra's connection to their vessel made the journey surprisingly smooth. She had somehow bonded with the ship's living components, turning their old mining craft into something far more capable than its original design. I don't understand how you're doing this, David said, watching engine efficiency readings that should have been impossible. Human technology uses biological components, but treats them as dead materials, Lyra explained, her hands resting on panels that now pulsed with soft light. When I encourage them to truly live, they remember what they were meant to become. The modifications went beyond simple efficiency improvements. Their hull began developing a crystalline coating that deflected sensor scans, making them harder to track. The life support system started producing cleaner air and water than the recyclers had ever managed before. Most remarkably, the ship's computer began displaying intuitive responses to their needs, almost as if it was learning to anticipate their thoughts. Is this what all Draconis technology is like? David asked. We grow our ships rather than build them, Lyra said, but your human vessels respond to my influence in ways that surprise me. There is something unique about how your species creates, something that makes your technology eager to evolve. On the 4th day, they received an encrypted message that made David's hands shake with relief. Dr. Elizabeth Warren had agreed to meet them at Titan Station, despite the risks involved. David's former mentor was apparently not as isolated as he had thought. Elizabeth trained me in xenobiology before I came to Mars, David explained to Lyra. She's brilliant but difficult. The university forced her out because she insisted that humans could learn to work directly with alien organisms. She was correct, Lyra replied. Your species has a natural compatibility with biological systems that most others lack. This ability frightens many galactic civilizations. Titan Station appeared ahead of them like a glowing jewel against the backdrop of Saturn's largest moon. The research facility was larger than David remembered, with new sections that looked grown rather than constructed. As they approached the docking bay, David realized that Dr. Warren had been busy with more than just research. David Chen, you always did have a talent for finding trouble, came Elizabeth Warren's familiar voice over the communication system. Bring your friend inside quickly. We have much to discuss and very little time. Dr. Warren met them at the airlock, and David was shocked by how much she had changed. His former mentor looked younger than her 60 years, with an energy and vitality that seemed to radiate from her skin. When she shook hands with Lyra, David noticed that both women showed immediate signs of recognition. "You've been in contact with other species," Lyra observed, studying Dr. Warren with her golden eyes. "For the past 3 years," Elizabeth confirmed. "Come, let me show you what we've been working on." Titan Station had been transformed into something that defied human engineering. Corridors curved like the inside of living creatures. Walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the air itself felt alive with microscopic organisms that enhanced breathing and healing. David realized that his mentor had been conducting experiments that went far beyond anything he had imagined. "How is this possible?" David asked as they walked through halls that seemed to respond to their presence. "We've been studying artifacts from dozens of species," Elizabeth explained. "But more importantly, we've been studying the humans who work with them. It turns out that about 1 in 10,000 humans has a natural ability to interface with alien biotechnology. They entered a vast laboratory where dozens of researchers worked alongside beings from species David didn't recognize. Tall, graceful creatures with silver skin worked next to humans at biomechanical workstations. Smaller beings that looked like living crystals grew equipment from raw materials. In one corner, a being that resembled a walking tree was tending to what looked like a garden of computer components. "These are refugees," Elizabeth explained, seeing David's amazement. "Members of various species who believe in cooperation rather than isolation. They've been coming here secretly for months." Lyra moved through the laboratory with obvious joy, communicating with the other aliens in ways that went beyond speech. David watched her scales shift through colors he had never seen before, patterns that seemed to convey complex emotions and ideas. "This is what I dreamed of finding," Lyra told David. "Proof that different species can work together and create something beautiful." A being that looked like a combination of octopus and butterfly approached them, its translucent skin showing moving patterns of light. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music played on glass instruments. "The human David has the strongest biocompatibility readings we have measured," it sang to Lyra. "His genetic patterns show remarkable adaptation potential." "What does that mean?" David asked nervously. Elizabeth smiled. "It means you're naturally gifted at something that most species spend millions of years evolving to achieve. You can form symbiotic bonds with alien organisms almost instantly." Over the next several hours, David learned things about himself and his species that changed his understanding of everything. Humans weren't just good at adapting to alien environments. They were uniquely capable of helping other species adapt and evolve, serving as biological bridges between different forms of life. "The Galactic Council maintains order through separation because they fear change," Elizabeth explained. "Most species reach a point of evolutionary stability and then stop growing. But humans seem to restart evolutionary processes in other species simply by working with them." "Is that why everyone is afraid of us?" David asked. "Fear and fascination," Lyra corrected. "Your species represents either the greatest threat or the greatest opportunity the galaxy has ever seen." Their discussion was interrupted by urgent alarms throughout the station. Long-range sensors showed multiple fleets converging on Titan, including ships that made David's blood run cold. The massive biomechanical vessels approaching from the outer system could only belong to the Draconis Collective. "My people have found us," Lyra said quietly, her scales showing patterns of resignation mixed with determination. "And the Galactic Council is right behind them," Elizabeth added, studying the sensor displays. "We have perhaps 6 hours before they arrive." David felt panic rising in his chest. After everything they had discovered, after seeing proof that cooperation between species was possible, it might all end in violence and separation. "There has to be something we can do," he said desperately. Elizabeth and Lyra exchanged a look that seemed to carry entire conversations. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. "There is one possibility," she said slowly. "The coordinates Lyra carries aren't just the location of a repository. They're the key to activating something that could change the entire nature of galactic civilization." "The seed vault," Lyra whispered. "More than that," Elizabeth replied. "A test that was left by the gardeners, the ancient species that created the repository. A test that can only be passed by species working together." David looked around the laboratory at the beings who had already chosen cooperation over fear. Despite the approaching danger, he felt hope growing in his chest. "Then we go to the seed vault," he said with more confidence than he felt. "All of us together." Lyra's scales shifted to patterns of gold and silver that David had learned meant joy mixed with fierce determination. "Yes," she agreed. "Together." As alarms continued to sound throughout Titan Station, the unlikely collection of humans and aliens began preparing for a journey that would determine the future of everyone in the galaxy. The coordinates hidden in Lyra's genetic memory led them to a region of space between Neptune and Pluto, where nothing should have existed. David stared at the sensor readings from their small fleet of escape vessels, trying to understand what he was seeing. "There's definitely something there," he reported to the other ships, "but it's not showing up on any of our scans." "It's cloaked," came the musical voice of their crystal being ally through the communication system. The Gardeners used technology that exists partially outside normal space. 3 ships had escaped from Titan Station before the arriving fleets could stop them. Elizabeth Warren commanded a research vessel filled with alien refugees and human volunteers. Lyra piloted a small craft that she had grown from Titan Station's living components. David flew their original mining ship, now so transformed by Lyra's influence that it barely resembled its original form. "I can feel it," Lyra announced suddenly. "The seed vault is responding to my presence." Space in front of them began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot ground. Slowly, something massive became visible against the starfield. David had expected an artificial structure, but what appeared before them looked more like a giant tree made of crystalline metal, its branches reaching out for thousands of kilometers. "It's beautiful," David whispered into his communicator. "It's alive," Lyra corrected, her voice filled with wonder. "The entire structure is a single organism created by the Gardeners to preserve and nurture life from across the galaxy." As they approached the seed vault, David began to understand its true scale. What he had thought were branches were actually vast corridors and chambers, each one containing different environments and ecosystems. Through transparent walls he could see forests of alien trees, oceans filled with unknown creatures, and landscapes that defied description. "How many worlds are represented here?" Elizabeth asked over the communication channel. "Millions," replied the tree-like being who had joined their expedition. "Every species the Gardeners encountered, every ecosystem they wished to preserve. But it is more than a museum. It is a laboratory for creating new forms of life." Their small fleet docked at what appeared to be a flower made of living metal. As they disembarked, David felt the artificial gravity adjust automatically to accommodate the different physiological needs of their diverse group. The air itself seemed to analyze and adapt, providing the perfect mixture of gases for each species present. "The seed vault is studying us," Lyra observed, her scales showing patterns of excitement and nervousness. "It's trying to determine if we meet the criteria for access." They moved through corridors that changed around them, walls flowing like liquid to create the most comfortable environment for each member of their group. David found himself walking on surfaces that felt perfectly designed for human feet, while their alien companions experienced their own optimized pathways. "The Gardeners built this place as a test," Elizabeth explained as they walked. "They face the same crisis we're experiencing now. Species becoming isolated and stagnant, afraid to change or grow. The seed vault was their solution." They entered a vast central chamber that took David's breath away. The space stretched out beyond the limits of his vision, filled with floating islands that each contained different biomes. Some islands held familiar Earth-like forests. Others showed alien landscapes that hurt to look at directly. In the center of it all, a massive tree grew from floor to ceiling, its trunk pulsing with patterns of light that seemed to carry information. "The heart tree," Lyra whispered, "the consciousness of the seed vault itself." As they approached the tree, its patterns of light began to change, responding to their presence. David felt a tingling sensation in his mind, as if something vast and ancient was gently touching his thoughts. Images suddenly flooded David's consciousness. He saw the Gardeners as they had been millions of years ago, a species that had mastered the art of biological cooperation. They had worked with countless other species, helping them grow and evolve together. But eventually, fear had overtaken wisdom. Species began to isolate themselves, choosing safety over growth. The Gardeners didn't die, David realized, speaking the knowledge that flowed into his mind. They transformed themselves into something beyond single-species existence. The heart tree pulsed brighter, and more information flooded their group. The seed vault wasn't just a repository of genetic information. It was a transformation engine, capable of allowing willing species to share beneficial traits while maintaining their essential natures. "This is what my people fear," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe and terror. "The possibility of change, of becoming something more than what we were born to be." David felt the tree reaching out to him specifically, recognizing something in his human genetics that resonated with its purpose. Images showed him what humans could become if they chose transformation, not losing their humanity, but expanding it to include the best traits of other species. "We have to choose," Elizabeth said, understanding flowing across her face. "The seed vault will only activate if we willingly undergo the transformation process. It can't be forced." Outside the seed vault, space lit up with the energy signatures of arriving fleets. Through the transparent walls, David could see massive Draconis bioships taking positions around the ancient structure. Sleek Galactic Council vessels formed defensive lines, and ships from dozens of other species created a complex web of alliances and threats. "They're all here," David observed grimly. "Everyone who wants to control or destroy what we've found." "The test has begun," Lyra said, her golden eyes reflecting the light from the heart tree. "Not just for us, but for everyone. The seed vault will only activate in the presence of multiple species, making the choice together." Through the communication systems, demands and threats began pouring in from the various fleets. The Draconis wanted Lyra returned and the seed vault destroyed. The Galactic Council demanded control of the ancient technology. Other species made their own claims and threats. David looked around at their small group of refugees and researchers, then at the vast fleets surrounding them. The odds seemed impossible, but something about the heart tree's presence filled him with unexpected calm. "What happens if we say yes?" he asked the tree directly. The answer came not in words but in visions of possibility. He saw species working together across the galaxy, sharing knowledge and traits while maintaining their unique natures. He saw humans serving as bridges between different forms of life, helping others grow while growing themselves. He saw a future where diversity was strength and cooperation was evolution. "And if we say no?" Elizabeth asked, more visions, darker ones. Species continuing to isolate and stagnate. Wars fought over resources and territory. The slow death of innovation and growth as fear overcame wisdom. David felt the weight of choice settling on his shoulders. Not just his choice, but the choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. "I know what I want," he said quietly, looking at Lyra and their alien companions. "But we have to decide together." Around them, the heart tree pulsed with anticipation, waiting for an answer that would change everything. The moment of decision came when weapons fire erupted between the opposing fleets outside the seed vault. David watched through the transparent walls as Draconis bioships clashed with Galactic Council vessels, their battle creating a light show that illuminated the ancient structure. "They're going to destroy each other," Elizabeth said grimly, monitoring the combat on her portable scanner. "And us with them," added their crystal being companion, its translucent form flickering with patterns of distress. David felt the heart tree's consciousness pressing gently against his mind, offering knowledge and asking for trust. Around him, the other members of their small group were experiencing the same contact, each one receiving visions tailored to their species and understanding. "It's now or never," David said, placing his hand on the heart tree's glowing bark. "I choose transformation." The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Energy flowed from the tree into David's body, carrying with it genetic information from across the galaxy. But instead of changing his essential humanity, the process seemed to expand it, adding new capabilities while keeping everything that made him who he was. David felt his senses expanding to perceive electromagnetic spectra he had never imagined. His understanding of biological systems deepened until he could almost see the connections between all living things. Most importantly, he felt a profound connection to every other being in the chamber, as if they were all part of a larger organism. Lyra stepped forward next, her scales shifting to patterns of gold and silver that David now understood meant courage and hope. When she touched the tree, her transformation was more subtle but equally profound. Her natural biomanipulation abilities expanded, allowing her to interface with any living system she encountered. One by one, the others made their choice. Elizabeth Warren gained the ability to directly communicate with alien organisms. The crystal being developed new ways to grow technology from raw minerals. The tree-like creature learned to photosynthesize energy from stellar radiation with perfect efficiency. But the most remarkable change was in their ability to work together. David found that he could share knowledge and skills with the others through direct bioelectrical contact. When Lyra needed to understand human technology, David could transfer that knowledge instantly. When he needed to comprehend alien biology, she could share her expertise directly. "We're still ourselves," David marveled, testing his new abilities. "But we're also more than ourselves." "This is what the gardeners discovered," Lyra said, her voice carrying harmonics that conveyed meaning beyond words. "Evolution doesn't have to mean losing what you were. It can mean becoming what you were meant to be." The heart tree began to pulse with increasing intensity, and David realized that their transformation was activating something larger. Throughout the seed vault, systems that had been dormant for millions of years began to awaken. The vast structure started broadcasting signals across space, offering the same choice to anyone willing to listen. Outside, the battle between the fleets suddenly paused as the seed vault's broadcasts reached them. David watched through the walls as ships from both sides began receiving the same visions and knowledge that his group had experienced. The choice was no longer limited to a few refugees and researchers. Every being in the solar system was being offered the chance to transform. "Look," Elizabeth said, pointing to the displays that showed the fleet positions. One by one, ships from various factions began to break away from their battle formations. A Draconis bioship moved toward the seed vault, its living hull pulsing with communication patterns that David's enhanced senses could now interpret as curiosity and hope. Several Galactic Council vessels followed, their crews apparently choosing exploration over enforcement. "They're making the same choice we did," David realized. But not everyone was ready for transformation. Hardline factions from multiple species continued fighting, determined to either control or destroy the ancient technology. Their weapons fire began targeting the seed vault itself, forcing David and his companions to take action. "We have to protect this place," Lyra said, her new abilities allowing her to interface directly with the seed vault's defensive systems. Working together, their transformed group began to activate capabilities that the gardeners had built into the structure millions of years ago. David found himself able to coordinate the station's biomechanical defenses, while Lyra encouraged rapid growth of protective barriers around vulnerable areas. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Instead of simple weapons fire, it became a conflict between different philosophies of existence. Those who chose transformation fought not to destroy their enemies, but to protect the possibility of change. They used the seed vault systems to disable attacking ships without harming their crews, offering choice instead of death. David discovered that his new abilities allowed him to communicate directly with the bio-components of Draconis ships, encouraging them to choose peace over violence. Many of the living vessels began to rebel against their commanders, seeking transformation instead of destruction. "This is incredible," David said as he watched former enemies beginning to work together. "We're not conquering anyone. We're inviting them to grow." The turning point came when a massive Draconis command ship, one of the largest living vessels ever grown, suddenly changed sides. Its bioneural systems had chosen transformation, and its crew found themselves experiencing the same expansion of consciousness that David's group had undergone. "I understand now," came a broadcast from the ship's commander, her voice carrying the musical harmonics of transformed speech. "My daughter Lyra was correct. Isolation is death. Growth requires connection." Within hours, the battle had become a celebration. Ships from dozens of species surrounded the seed vault, their crews undergoing transformation and discovering new ways to work together. The ancient structure began growing new sections to accommodate all the beings seeking change. David found himself at the center of something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans were becoming the bridge species that Lyra had theorized about, helping others overcome their fear of change while growing beyond their own limitations. "What happens now?" David asked Elizabeth as they watched the continuing transformation from the heart tree chamber. "Now we become gardeners," she replied, using a term that carried new meaning for their transformed minds. "We help the galaxy grow into something it was always meant to become." Lyra approached David, her scales now showing patterns of colors that hadn't existed before her transformation. "Do you regret your choice?" she asked. David looked around at the chamber filled with beings from across the galaxy, all working together to create something beautiful and new. He thought about his lonely apartment on Mars, his isolated research, and his 39th birthday spent in solitude. "No regrets," he said, taking Lyra's hand and feeling the bioelectrical connection that now allowed them to share thoughts and emotions directly. "This is the best birthday present I could have imagined." "Birthday?" Lyra asked, accessing his memories through their connection. "It's been exactly 1 month since we met," David explained. "I'm 40 today." Lyra's scale shifted to patterns of joy and celebration, colors that David could now perceive in electromagnetic spectra beyond normal human vision. Around them, other transformed beings began to echo the celebration, creating a symphony of bioluminescent patterns that filled the chamber with living light. "Then we should celebrate," Lyra said, and David felt her happiness flowing through their connection. "Today marks not just your birth, but the birth of a new kind of civilization." As David looked out at the ships surrounding the seed vault, each one filled with beings choosing growth over stagnation, he realized that his days of loneliness were truly over. He was part of something larger now, something that would help the galaxy itself grow beyond its limitations. The transformation had only just begun, but David knew that the future would be full of wonders he could barely imagine. And he would face that future not alone, but surrounded by friends from across the stars, all of them gardeners tending to the greatest garden of all, life itself.